Passion Harvest.
Hello, passionate listeners. Welcome to Passion Harvest. I am Louisa, your host, International Passion Ambassador. Thank you so much for being here wherever you are in the world right now. I'm so excited about my guest today. Her name is Jenny Cockell. This is going to be an awesome episode. And if you don't know who she is, Jenny has had past life memories as early as age 3. Jenny had known that she had lived before as Mary Sutton, a young Irishwoman who died 21 years before Jenny was born. Her constant dream memory was of Mary dying alone and desperately worried about what would happen to the 8 young children she left behind. When at last Jenny's own children were born, she finally acknowledged that she needed to find out what had happened to her lost family from her previous lifetime. It's one of the most fascinating examples of past life memories which have actually been confirmed. As an adult using maps she drew as a child from her past life memories, Jenny traced her memories to the exact location where she lived in her past life in Ireland. Jenny also located Mary's children and personally reunited with 5 of them. Jenny has recalled not only her past lives, but also future lives as far ahead as the 23rd century. Her amazingly detailed glimpses of the future are more than merely personal images. They allow her to formulate an overall view of what the future holds for all of us, including a planet much lower in population, but also safer and more pleasant than the world of today. Jenny Cockell continues to explore the nature of reality. She is a member of Mensa, the High IQ Society, and is the author of 6 best-selling books. This is her story and this is her passion. Jenny, I am so honored and excited to have you on Passion Harvest. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you.
Well, let's just get started. I'm so excited to talk to you. We were speaking just before we're recording, but about past life. I'm really interested to know what it feels like when you have your past life memories. What does it feel like to experience them?
It's just memory, and the memories were always there. I had the nightmares when I was about 18 months old. About a lot of them were about the past life deaths, but of course I didn't talk about them until much later, when I realized that other people weren't talking about past lives, and I didn't understand why, because I assumed everybody remembered, because I'd always remembered quite a few of them. I assumed it was normal. I still think it probably is normal, but people tend to forget as they grow up. So by the time I got to 3 and started to talk to my mother and just broached the subject, it was because I didn't understand why nobody else was talking about it. It was I was kind of surprised. I thought it was time that it was mentioned. So I had a number of past lives. Very often, some of the less detailed ones I would get mixed up with each other. I wasn't quite sure. I couldn't separate them. But Mary was very distinct. I had one in Japan that was very distinct. And then I had little bits of other lives that didn't always make a great deal. For piecing the pieces together, I couldn't always work out where it was. But I've managed to, as an adult, when I started researching, I've managed to sort out the past life in Ireland. I visited the place in Japan the life before that and managed to find the location. Well, I'd always drawn the location of the house there. And I also managed to find a family member who was able to accept what I was saying about the life between Mary and now. So it's really 3 past lives I've managed to sort out. And I didn't actually start off trying to sort them out for other people. That wasn't really on the radar. I needed to sort it out for myself because I had grown up with these memories. And the more I talked about them, the more people were kind of dismissing them or just thinking of them as it's a belief system. I needed to solve find the families for myself, to solve the past for myself, but also to then turn around and it's almost, look, I wasn't wrong. This did happen. And so when I started to go public about it, it wasn't any great need for other people to see what I was doing, as much as just to put it out there. I didn't even expect anybody to be interested, to be perfectly honest. It's just I needed to put it out there to say, look, I wasn't wrong. These were my memories. They were real, and let go. And of course, what happened was quite the opposite, because everybody got interested then. So I haven't been able to let go ever since.
It's absolutely fascinating. And I think we always, well, I love that you didn't do it for anyone else, you did it for yourself, but we always like validation. I said before, I think you're very brave because there's many skeptics out there. How did you feel about people that dismissed?
I'm not the slightest bit interested in what skeptics, if that's their view, why am I'm not here to change their mind. I mean, I did have a problem, one particular skeptic, I won't name, but when I was a child, I used to draw maps of the village of Malahide, quite detailed maps, marked
this is Mary Sutton's life.
That's it, where in Malahide the house was, the exact position. I only ever researched that exact position. I found on an atlas where the town was, and from childhood I named Malahide. And this very prominent skeptic, totally different. This very prominent skeptic said that I had gone all over Ireland to try and find a village that fitted. I don't know why he even bothered. I mean, if you're going to be skeptical about something, use logical argument. Don't make stuff up.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, that was quite in the forefront. It seemed to get online before my ideas got online, which I thought was quite damaging. But as I said, I think everybody's allowed their own opinion, as long as you use the facts.
Yes.
You don't make stuff up.
Oh, I think you're wonderful, and your books are remarkable, by the way. For those people that are trying to explore their past lives or potentially have memories of past lives, but sometimes doubt themselves and think they're fanciful stories, is there a difference, in your opinion, between past lives or stories? Is there a different emotional signature to their lives?
There probably is. I am not very good at stories and imagination. I discovered a few years ago that I'm actually on the autistic spectrum, and one of the things that we find difficult is making up stories. We can use imagination in other ways, but we do often find it very, very difficult to actually make up stories. So I'm not sure what it's like for somebody to make up a story in their mind. For me, it's just memory. It's always been just memory, and sort of detailed memory. The nice thing about the spectrum is you do get a really good memory. But so I don't know that I can really answer that, the difference. It's going to, past life memory is going to be exactly the same as memory from this life. So if you remember something happening and you remember the people around you and you remember the incident, it's not going to be any different if it was when you were 6 or in a previous life when you were 60. It's still going to have the same feel about it. You're going to have the same images. You're going to react the same way because it's just memory. I don't think it's anything more complicated than that. No.
It's fascinating. I just want to touch briefly on Mary Sutton. It's such a well-known past life. There was even a movie about it, and you even drew the hospital bed in the hospital room that you passed in.
Yes. Yes, so I remember the position of the bed, and I remember the view from the window. So I just put down all the details I could, and they took the details along to the hospital, and the matron said, "Oh, I know which room that is," and took them straight to it because it was recognizable from the description, which was useful. It was very strange going back into the room. The weirdest thing was, I remember from the hospital bed, I could see one window, and the minute I walked in there, I realized there are 2 windows. Why are there 2 windows? And there was a pier that stood out between the 2 windows, and I moved myself into the position in the room where the bed was, and you can only see 1 window and a pier. Couldn't see the second window. I thought, well, thank goodness for that, because for a moment I thought I was in the wrong room.
So with Mary Sutton and she died, did you obviously felt such a draw to the children that you left behind in her life. Did you also feel her pain and her suffering?
One of the memory is peculiar. Sometimes you don't remember that you'll certainly remember the suffering. The actual physical pains, you don't tend to, you block them out. If you've had children and you've been through the birth, you usually don't remember the pain until you go and have another child. And, oh no, oh dear.
That's an excellent point. That's so
you
true.
That's it. You forget the pain.
Otherwise, you wouldn't have more than one, right?
The emotional pain does stay. So you do tend to feel that. And back to your previous question about people remembering past lives. You imagine there I was, an 18-month-old baby, having dreams about dying with fever, leaving my children behind, and then having dreams about drowning and feeling guilty and letting my family down, and then having dreams about being run over, again as a child, and just looking down and seeing the damage just for a moment before leaving. And you imagine going through that as a tiny child, and then all the way through childhood. So although it's very useful that some people remember past lives from the point of view of trying to verify the experience, it's not always a pleasant thing to try to seek out. And I do have to admit, I mean, the being run over was the life between Mary and now. And most of my life, I would wake up at least several times a month, and sometimes rather more often. And the first image in my mind when I woke up was that my legs had been crushed. And at times of stress, I'd wake up and my legs had been crushed. And it turned out that there was this accident that ended quite a 6-year-old child's life. And when I was about 6, I used to have nightmares of trucks chasing me, coming up onto the pavement and chasing me. So it's not all brilliant, but it's very useful from the point of validation of the experience and trying to understand the nature of life. But to go seeking it, it's not always going to be such a great thing. And I do know a number of people who have had sort of post-traumatic stress symptoms from past life memories. So yeah.
And so I have to ask you, what was it like reuniting as Mary Sutton, the Irish woman that you lived in a previous life? What was it like reuniting with your children?
Probably a relief.
Mary's children, I should say. I'm sorry, Mary's.
My children as Mary. Yeah, I think a relief probably, because seeing them grown up and being able to hug them and see the lives they had and understand that they had problems, but they had still got to where they had and they were okay. So I imagine, I think, yeah, the strongest reaction I had was probably relief. And it was complicated because they're not children anymore. They, when I first met them, this is sort of 30 odd years ago, when I first met them, they were not children anymore. They were adults.
Older than you.
I knew how, that's it. I knew how I felt, but I couldn't impose how I felt on how they felt. It was all fairly new to them. It was a peculiar thing. I didn't want them to feel that it was a peculiar thing because I was protective of them and I was protective of how they felt. So the whole thing, I mean, I even approaching them in the first place was agonizing. Do I, don't I, what, how am I going to, is this going to actually cause them more harm than just leaving them alone? But then I realized I couldn't rest unless I saw that they were okay. And in the end I used, people can always turn you down and reject you, but you've got to give them that option. And the only way to give them that option is to approach them. So it's a bit like if somebody's been adopted, you don't know what the reaction is going to be unless you take the first step and give them the chance to react. Otherwise, nothing's happened.
And why do you think, I mean, what has it taught you about life? I mean, and I'd love to move on to the future in a minute, but what has it taught you about life, recalling all these past lives?
What it's taught me is that most people forget. Actually, it astonishes me that how could you possibly forget all the things you've been through? But it also that you're supposed to forget, Because how can you live now if you've still got all those memories, all those things that you have to resolve?
Yeah.
How can you really immerse yourself in now? It's difficult to talk about. Sometimes people say, well, how's it changed you? And I thought, well, it hasn't changed me because I've always remembered. There are other things that have had much more profound effect. I'll tell you about, there was an experience I had when I was about 14, I suppose. I'd been babysitting and I was walking back home, and it was a daytime babysitting, so it was only early evening. And the trees, as I was walking past, the light was flickering slightly, and I was interested. I just looked round, and just for a moment, I had an experience that took me decades to find out what it was. It was just so peculiar. I suddenly felt that I was drifting into the trees, that I was part of the energy of the trees. And then it just spread out as though I was everywhere and all life was connected. I was part of all life. And I suddenly relaxed because I realized that time isn't important. Life continues. Nothing that I was worrying about mattered. And then just everything came back again. It was as though I was out of body. And I was in everything. And it all came back again. And I realized I had hardly changed my step. It had happened in a fraction of a second, and yet it had felt timeless. And I didn't tell anybody about this. I thought, this is very strange. Until I discovered, strange enough, Australia, and there's an Australian Institute of mystical experiences, and they have been cataloguing people who have had experiences like that. And it's basically the same thing that Buddha was talking about as enlightenment, the joining with all life,
Oneness.
being one with everything. And there are slightly different types. Some of them last, some of them are less intense, and they last a little longer. The really short ones are often the most profound. And I think after that, I was less afraid of talking about the things that happened. I was bothered about talking about that one for a while, but I started to talk more and more about premonitions I had, the past life memories, and I worried less because you sort of think that one person doesn't actually matter that much in the larger scheme of things. So what you say, as long as you're being honest, it's why not just share and say. But that was an odd one.
No, I love that. Thank you for sharing. And I guess also we don't realize the amount of, well, we're talking about time. There is no time, but our lives are just a pinprick in the whole scheme of the bigger picture.
Yes.
My other question to you is, I guess I don't think time is necessarily linear from beginning to end. What do you think about our lives are happening consecutively all at once?
No, I see time as linear because my memory is linear. When I go back and I think of different past lives, it is linear. The same way that their single life is linear. You think back to your childhood, and then I think back to between lives, and then I think back to a death, and then I think back to the previous life, and then that goes on and on and on back. One of the oldest memories I had was as a Neolithic hunter, and I have bits of memory all the way through from there. I think what happens is life itself, the energy of life, has always been with us. I think that everything, not just everybody, everything is reincarnated, that the process is that life becomes physical and then it becomes energy. This is one of my many ideas, that the universe is in two layers. And there's one layer you go to where it's just energy. And there's this layer where it's mostly physical, but the energy fits into this layer. So the two layers rubbing against each other the whole time, connected, but not a single universe, but a sort of double universe. So I would see life as part of the original energy that was created when the universe was created, and that it is this constant cycle with everything, that it passes from energy to physical over and over, but everything, plants, animals, everything. So for that point of view, it would have to be linear. And linear time in any case is tied to space. Time and space are the same thing. So if you had anything other than linear time, space would have to be completely different as well. It just, the physics wouldn't work, if that makes sense.
No, I'm just thinking about it. It's a really interesting way of explaining it.
It makes it harder to explain things like premonition, where you see something that's going to happen. But the only way I can work that out is when something happens, occasionally, if you get an odd moment, something will happen. And perhaps you send the memory back so that you know about that thing happening at 2 points in time. I think you have free will, so that I don't think everything's preordained. But I think sometimes if something's already happened, then you'll see it. It may have already happened in 30 years' time, but if it has already happened, doesn't it get complicated?
So everything. Sorry, please go on. I'm just getting excited here.
It is complicated, but I do think we have free will. I mean, there are odd things. I've always had, it's my mother's side of the family, and lots of people have odd sort of things like that, premonitions and things that happen, precognitive experiences. But I'll pick one. When I was about 16, it was a dream one. Often you're wide awake. They often happen. You think, oh, that's strange. And then at the moment it actually happens. Oh, that's strange as well. So that they're two things connected. But there was a dream. I told my brother's friend about it. It was really quite odd, because I was driving an estate car and I had two blonde-haired children in the back, and I was reversing into a parking space, and I looked up and there was a tower with a sort of ruin, like it's an old castle up on a bit of a mount, and it was it was going to be an awful time. It was the beginning of something very, very difficult. And he made some comments about it, or what he thought it might be, and I forgot about it. Well, I didn't entirely forget about it, but I tried to make sure that the situation didn't happen, because I didn't want, there seemed to be so much worry. Anyway, many decades later, I went out for the day with the children, and I had an estate car because we had a dog, so we had a estate car. And I reversed it into the parking space because I was reversing, and looked up, saw the tower, glanced back at my children, looked at the tower again. It's today. It's happening now. And it was, I mean, all sorts of things happen, but it's just a snippet of time where you just see one thing in a lot of detail. And it doesn't always make sense. You don't know what's going to happen either side of it, but it's just that bit. And I think it's that moment that something happens, and for some reason you know about it back when. I would love a physicist to come on board and explain but I do believe that you have free will and that you can make your mind up, and but at the same time I was always going there.
Well,
because it had already happened.
I often wonder if I agree we live in a universe of free will, but are fate and free will the same thing? And has everything that's going to happen already occurred in some time in time space?
In some senses, it will have already happened, but only once you get there. So yes, have we already made these decisions? So, I don't know. It's
well, this probably segues us on beautifully onto your future lives.
Yes, some of that was experimental because I'd used hypnosis. I used hypnosis again to try. It started off that I have always had premonitions anyway. Sometimes quite a few close together. Sometimes I'll only see a few days ahead. Sometimes it'll be a few weeks. Sometimes, in that one I've just told you about, it years, decades ahead. But I was sitting in the car on the way back from a friend's, and my husband was driving. I know what was playing. I know what tape he'd put, Michael Mechanics on the CD, tape. We had tapes then. And when I glanced out of the window, we got this flickering tree thing again. It was in the afternoon, And I looked back at him and I listened to the music and I looked at my lap and I suddenly realized that wasn't my lap. I could see dark skin and a child's legs. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I turned around to my husband and said, something a little odd is happening. I'll tell you about it in a minute. So I was fully awake. And I envisaged myself as a young Asian child. And I felt roughly I knew which country. And I thought, well, this is, and I made notes. And I thought, well, this is interesting. We'll follow this up. And then I used hypnosis to follow it up. Now, the rider here is hypnosis isn't totally reliable. Some bits that come up are useful, some bits are not. Now, interestingly, from looking at the future, because this was a long time ago, this was before even the internet, some of the things I saw with the progression experiment, looking to the future, were things I had already seen, things I already knew about. But I'll give you just 3 things that I thought were going to happen slightly more distant future that happened rather faster. One of them was advertising boards. I could see advertising boards where it had a video, and so it's moving pictures.
Yeah.
That happened about, I think it was about 8 to 10 years later after the experiment. The next thing I saw was shopping centres where the shops had huge cinema-sized screens with adverts on. That's probably been only in the last 10 years. I don't know if you've seen, they're mostly in the last 10 years. The other thing I saw was from one point onwards, a lot of people working from home on the computer. It was definitely computer screens. Now, this was before the internet, before anybody had even understood the potential of computers, but it was definitely from one point on. And of course, from last year on, we've had a lot of people working with computers. So I think my time frame might not have been quite right, but I think that's where you get the some of the hypnosis. It's not where you get the inaccuracies, but they're also these vivid accuracies. The strange thing I'll tell you about.
Now we're getting a bit strange, are we?
Yes, a little bit strange. Oh, now we're getting a bit strange. I was a couple of years ago. I started working on a new manuscript. I thought I was interested in, and the first chapter, a lot of it, what it was dealing with, was the risk of a pandemic. And at the same time, I was having dreams over and over about people over 80 and nursing homes and lots of people in the older generation dying, especially people in sort of crowded communities. And I thought it's because I was working in nursing homes, and I thought it's probably I'm finding the stress of working in nursing homes too much. I think I ought to start cutting down on work and thinking about retirement. So I misinterpreted what I was seeing, and that happens so often. One year when I was quite young, I suppose, I guess 20s, we went to my mother's for Christmas, and everybody was talking, and I tend to I talk a lot now, but I tended to be quite quiet, and I was sort of standing there and watching people as they were talking, and I started to see people, the way they would look as they were older. And I looked at my mother, and she seemed to put a bit of weight on. She was quite thin at the time, and she put a bit of weight on. Her hair didn't go white, but I could see her getting older. I thought, that's interesting. So I looked at my younger brother, and I saw him getting a little white at the temples, and he put a lot of weight on as well. I thought, oh, okay. I wonder if I could look at myself. No, let's look at my other brother. And I looked at my older brother, and I thought, my goodness, he's not going to age. Lucky chap. Well, of course, he died in his early 30s. And again, I misinterpreted what I was seeing. So you can see things, you can see into the future, but it's the interpretation isn't always right. Yes. So although I had, with the experiment, I looked at a lot of things in the future, some of it will. Some of it, but some of it will, from the hypnosis, will be perhaps slightly out. Often when you see things, just see things, they are spot on, absolutely spot on. But again, I mean, the hypnosis, I have ambivalent. Sometimes I think, oh no, it really doesn't work. It's not the best vehicle. Then I look at how many things came up that were right, and I think, yes, but it can work. So it's a difficult one to look at, the hypnosis, sort of generally. So yes, quite a lot of the stuff I saw will. The time frame might not be spot on. Some of it will be perhaps when you get to things like names. I'm useless with names anyway. What did I think? Did I think I was going to be better with names under hypnosis? It's unlikely. But then again, under hypnosis, when I was looking at the little life between Mary Sutton and now, the 6-year-old child
Yes.
who was run over, I managed to get, I had not remembered, as far as I was aware, I hadn't remembered the name from childhood. I just remembered odd events. And it was when I started piecing them together, I realized, oh, that's from that life. But under hypnosis, I got Charles S. And I got much more accurate time frame than I had before. I was able to look up deaths for any child, 6, or I put a bit of a year either side just in case. And there was only one in the whole country with a Charles S. who died in those years at the right age. And we looked at lots, and there were quite a lot of overlap, just in case there was inaccuracy there. And it was this being run over by a truck, and then all my memories came back. I thought, oh no, that's that legs crushed thing. That's what it was about. That's why I had horrible dreams about a truck chasing me onto the pavement when I was going to school. And then I started to look at I got the death certificate, and I looked at the road layout, and I looked at the road layout on the birth certificate first, and I thought, no, it's different. And it was years before I had the courage to go and look at the road layout for the address on the death certificate, and I thought, oh, it's exactly the same. It's right. So again, hypnosis did help with that one. But
it's not 100% accuracy.
No, it isn't. No.
Very close. Sorry.
I think if you've got the memories already and you've got the ability already, then perhaps 60%. I don't know what it's like if you don't have anything there to start with.
Yes.
So, but it's useful. It has its purpose. Yeah.
I'm interested, and I do want to go back onto the future live memories. This is so exciting. But what does it feel like going to the actual geographical location of your past life memories?
You can actually see it. If you look at film footage of any child who has past life memory, and they've filmed the first time that they go back to the location, there is a moment of just overwhelming emotion, and it's shock emotion very often. So when you first go back and you look at it, I'll tell you what goes through your head, and you can see. I've watched quite a number of these documentaries and the children doing it, and I know what's going. You suddenly realize that although that memory was always there and the images were always there, you haven't let go, and your memory is still stuck in that lifetime at that time. So that what hits you is, it's not now. I can't go back.
Right.
This is the place. I can't go back. I'm not that person now. So the first thing that hits you is actually a shock that it was a different time. But I've done that a few times now, because I went to Japan and saw the place. That was odd, because it was I wasn't left alone long enough to actually get my thoughts together.
So being left alone is important.
Yes. No, I really needed that, but I managed to do it anyway, retrospectively. But I suppose the going to the cottage in Ireland was one of the biggest shocks, because it was a ruin, and I was standing there and I thought, I cannot have my children back.
This is the life of Mary Sutton.
Yes, they've grown up. This is it. Time's gone by. And it's the feeling you get used to. It happens a couple of times with different lives, but the first time it is quite a shock, because you realize you've held that memory of that time as though it hadn't passed, as though you're still there. But time has passed, and you can't, you have to let go. And I think a lot of that, it's a lot of the impetus in past life memory is learning to let go.
And in some way, is it a relief?
Oh, yes, you get that as well. But the initial thing is just that, oh, yes, because, you know, it is here, it is real, I'm not bonkers. Yes.
I'd love to move on to that. You mentioned that in the future that the Asian girl, and I believe her name's Nadia.
Yes.
2040, I think, around.
Yes, I found the spelling, and it's the spelling, the net that they use in Nepal is very slightly different. There's another, it's Nadia.
Oh, I'm pronouncing it incorrectly. Sorry, Nadia.
No, that's right, because we always think of Nadia, but as they said, but I'd always heard it as that. Yeah, that was quite interesting, because I didn't know how much would be right, but it turned out that I got the soil type right for the area. I have difficulty when I'm looking at things to get the heights right. I'm not very good on getting the topography quite right, but yeah, that and I'm still think I'm going there. Yeah, I do think I got quite a lot of that right. That was interesting. I wish I'd seen more, but you only see what you see.
Yes. This is the year 2040.
Yeah, so in that sort of era, that sort of time, yes.
And
I'm often a year or two out, so don't.
Oh well, I'm not going to hold you against it. You've drawn very detailed maps of this life and gone into detail in your book. I was actually thinking about your children, for example, that would they ever think about going to visit you?
We've had that discussion,
Nadia.
Yes, we've had that discussion.
What did they say?
Yeah, I think it's quite possible. The only thing is, would I remember? And I'm not sure, because I think when it comes to remembering past lives, I think most children remember some bits, and then they forget as you come into understanding more about this life and the now. You tend to forget, because that's what you're supposed to do. I think remembering the what a lot of the researchers say is that it's because the past life ended early, young, and with unfinished business, which tends to be fairly consistent. But I want to add something else. I think you need the right hardware. So I inherited a lot of the psychic abilities from my mother's side of the family, but the intense memory from my father's side. And I think you have to have the kind of brain that will hang on to the memories and to hang on to the details. I obsess. Well, that's actually quite useful. If you go over and over something, it keeps it fresh.
Yes.
So I do think that the software, if you think of the software as the soul that leaves one body, enters another, the hardware is the DNA, the way you're wired. If you get the right software fitting into the right hardware, then you will remember past lives. If you get different hardware, it's not going to work. And I don't think I remember next time, which is kind of sad.
As Nadia.
Yeah.
You also talk about she's a very spiritual person. And I loved in the book that even though she has the same soul, she really had very little, so quite poor, but you never thought of yourself as lacking in anything.
No, but that's how you should be, isn't it?
Yes.
You should be content with who you are and the sort of life you have. Yeah, I think that's the right way to go about it. Because if you look at lots of different lives, you look at lives, for instance, where people are affluent, are they necessarily happier? It's not the route for happiness, self-contentment is the route for happiness. So yes, why not?
Yes. And you've seen a couple of lives of yours in the 23rd century, which I just love to.
Yeah, that I think began because that was wholly hypnosis. So I'm less certain, except that the things I saw were the same things that I've been seeing in precognitive experiences all my life. So I was only, so even though I'm uncertain about the personalities, I'm fairly certain about the information. So I've always seen fewer people. I've always seen changes in technology. But I mean, some of it's fairly obvious. Oh, there's a strange thing. Another strange thing. When I was at school, our geography teacher went to Norway, and she was looking at the glaciers, and she took photographs of the glaciers, and she said, those pegs, that's where the glaciers have melted each year since the Industrial Revolution. And I thought, but that's wrong. That means that the Earth is warming up. Since the Industrial Revolution, when we were burning coal, the Earth is warming up. I thought, well, that makes sense, because I've seen lots of flooding in the future. I've seen problems with weather changes in the future. But being just a school child, nobody would listen to me when I was talking in the 1960s about global warming. Nobody would listen. I thought, but this is going to happen. We've got to look at this. This is what the future holds. And I've probably lost my track there slightly.
No, you're doing really well. We're just talking about the future. It's not so much the personalities, but what you see in the external landscape.
Very much, yeah, the stuff I was seeing was very much the same as the stuff I had always seen anyway.
You saw a great reduction in the human population.
When I was at college, I looked into why that might happen, because again, as I said, it's not just from the hypnosis session I saw that, it's something I've always seen. And I was trying to find out why that might happen. And I found in the medical library some very useful information on male fertility, and discovered that male fertility has been dropping for the last, probably the last 100 years. It's been steadily dropping. And I spent quite a few decades, long before I started researching my past lives, looking at the reasons for this reduction in population, and possibly linked to infertility. And a lot of it seemed to be based on chemicals, PCBs especially, but the chemicals produced by industry, plastics. Yes. Your water arrives in your house in plastic. Plastic has chemicals that mimic female hormones, which isn't too bad for women, but isn't really good news for the men. So that's one way that the population could reduce. And already now the level of infertility where couples can't produce children has gone up quite considerably. It's always been a thing, but now it has gone up quite considerably. But I don't think that's the only reason that the population would drop. If there's any sense, when you look at global warming, if it's created, the problems are created by us. So if there were fewer of us, there would be fewer emissions, and we could get it into reverse and get control of it. So one hopes that some of it is a conscious effort to reduce population, because that's the only way in the long term to solve global warming. So we've got the things you see, the things you sense, the things you know are going to happen in the future, and then trying to work out how and why, and looking at the science.
Yes, it was interesting. I mean, when you wrote one of the books, you talk about computers and people will be working from home, but it was interesting that you talk about the computers wouldn't be centralized worldwide. It would be in smaller networks.
Yes, I don't know whether that was just my own concerns about the internet, or that to control attacks, you need to have doors, as it were,
Yes.
to shut off sections.
For security.
Yeah, security, basically. So it might have just been my way of understanding how security would work, which is incredibly necessary.
Yes, and sorry, I'm just backtracking here. This is very exciting, but the infertility, but the population that you see in the 23rd century is 5% of what's on the world, approximately 5% of what's on the world. Eventually.
Yes, eventually. I mean, with this, we're talking long term. Yes, eventually.
And you don't talk about any wars or events that you've seen.
I'd seen odd things that I couldn't. The problem, there are different people who see stuff for the future. There are different types of people. Some people do see major events. The Twin Towers, there were people painting that event a couple of years before it happened. There were people who were aware and may not have realized what it was several years before it happened. I don't tend to see major events. I tend to see things from a personal standpoint. So in any of my past lives, in any of the stuff I'm looking at in the future, if I'm not in the place where there's a problem, I won't know about it, unfortunately. So I'm not a great, I'm not very useful.
You are.
But I did see odd sort of hiccups. I saw personal difficulties at different times, odd struggles. Mostly towards the end of this century, there did seem to be a few problems, but whether that's related to weather changes or political changes, very difficult to say.
And you've also seen your own death in this life.
Yes, kind of. Well, yes. I've seen myself looking back at different points in my life, and I can't get beyond a certain point. That was another reason for me to choose when I was retiring. I thought, well, gosh, I've only got, I'm not telling you, that many years. I think if I retire now, I'll have that many years to enjoy. If I leave it too long, I'll only have I won't have quite so many. So yeah, I'd see myself a number of times at a certain age and not beyond that age. So rather than the actual death, just a point where it doesn't go any further.
Is that a blessing or a curse?
It doesn't bother me. Really, it doesn't bother me a lot. It's just that it's like, I suppose it's like retirement. You get to a point where you know everything's going to change.
I have to, well, I think I know the answer. I have to ask the question, are you afraid of death and dying?
No, it's not actually, no. Pain, yes. But then the pain stops at a certain point during death anyway, if there is pain. I mean, I remember one day that I was run over. I had no memory of the pain. I think it was shock, but actually no, I was quite thankful for that, but there was no memory of pain. But the difficulty is having to, you have to let go of now. You have to let go of the people, trust that they'll be fine, and just move on. Although you can still kind of hang around a bit. There's last summer, I kept having dreams, the same dream over and over. And there was a group of people in this dream, and then one of them, big grin, come and say something to me. And I didn't know why it just kept going on and on and on. And eventually I figured out, I listened to what the person was saying. I know who that is. How strange. So I looked up on the internet, and they died 3 years earlier.
Gosh.
Once I looked it up, and on the day I looked up their birthday, I hadn't realized. And then I thought, well, that's odd. Why 3 years? Oh, well, never mind. And then I kept getting insistent. I had to go and look at the house. Well, I live about 40 miles away, so it was an 80-mile round trip. And I thought, I can't be bothered to go back to where I used to live. But it kept on. I've got to go and look. Okay, I'll look at the house. Perhaps I'll go next week. No, go now. So I had to go the next day and drive 40 miles. And I thought, well, I'll look at my old house as well and have a look about. And I turned the road into where this house was. And the house, I knew, it had been sold 3 years earlier. But I looked down and I thought, there's a house down there that's all clad in building scaffolding and stuff. And I thought, oh no, it's his house. And I went down there, and the whole thing had been gutted. And I kept hearing, look at my house. Look what they're doing. And I said, yeah, I know, but we can't do anything. It's not your house anymore. So you can get this people hanging around for a little while,
like an earthbound spirit.
But not that I don't. Because again, if you have the two levels of the universe,
right.
They don't have to be earthbound because you're connected. The
it's
energy
right here.
It's right here anyway. Yes, so it's connected anyway. So I assume what happened was none of his family would listen, and he realised I would. But so yeah, that sort of thing can happen. So you can watch for a while and check and make sure everybody's all right.
And what do you think? Once we leave our physical body, what do you think before we're reincarnated or return to another human form?
What do I remember?
Do you remember? And what happens in the in-between state?
I do. The first time I talked about it, I went to a conference in Norway, 1993, and it was the first proper talk I'd given, and I was really quite nervous about lecturing. But at the same time, I thought it was important to do so, to share the ideas. And somebody in the audience asked, what do you remember of Between Lives? And I'd never really told anybody. So I started to talk about it. And in the audience was Daniel Brinkley, who had had near-death experiences. And he came over and said, yeah, it's exactly the same. And he told me about his near-death experiences. And it was quite a relief. I thought, I was really sort of on the edge there, just... Yeah. Felt very exposed, just saying, look, I remember this and I remember that. I hadn't read about near-death experiences. This was a while ago. It wasn't as well documented. But what I remember was pretty much the same. I remember the hospital, well, I'll do Mary. I remember the hospital room as Mary. And I remember looking down, suddenly it's not drifty, it's bang, you're out.
Not like out of the movies.
No, not at all. And slightly off centre and really quite high. And I saw somebody come in. Turned out it was a priest. And the nurse came in, nurse went out, nurse brought a priest in. And he knelt. And then the next thing, I was folding up into a very small ball of energy and was sucked backwards because I was still looking, my attention was still there. So I was sort of sucked backwards through a vortex, a tunnel, some sort of tunnel anyway. So I was looking for another word, scientific term, but anyway. And then I don't remember much about the arrival because it wasn't a near-death experience. It's my memory of a past life, and I let go a lot of the memory at that point. But I remember the bulk of the time, and there were lots and lots of these energies that used to be people. Bright light, and the energies were bright. I don't know whether the light was from the energies, and it was fairly timeless. The things weren't sort of drifting about. There's like almost like a lattice work that everything was stable, and there was a sense of being connected to every other thing. The only thing I could liken it to was that experience I had that was labeled a mystic experience, where I felt that I was part of every other living thing and everything was all right. It didn't matter. It was very, very similar to that. It was like being a baby hugged by your mother, but you had that feeling with every single other energy there. Very, very strong, and just quite peaceful. And then eventually a sort of sense of needing, and then into the next life. And they're all slightly different. The wormhole, that was the one I was looking for, the scientific term. So it was like a wormhole, and my 2-tier system of the universes, it could be that it was some kind of like a wormhole. The one drowning in Japan in the late 1800s, it was as though the water was turning. There was actually a turning. Now, I didn't realize any sense of turning with the other death memories, but in this one, because it was underwater, it felt that the water was part of this vortex. And that one, I went forwards. I could see forwards where I was going, and I could see light. And sometimes you can get light flashing either side in colours, but so very, very similar. And this sense of timelessness. So it's almost as though the other side of our universe has slightly different physics to, well, slightly, considerably
not non-physical.
So I see it as a balancing side, and I wonder sometimes, will this talk about, well, go back to physics, whether I'm right or not. They're looking for dark matter. There's recently I read a scientific paper where they think that dark matter may be connected via subatomic particles to an area that we can't see. And I thought, but this is what I've been saying, that we are connected at a very minimum, perhaps through a single dimension, to the other half of the universe. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Some of the mathematicians are coming up with similar ideas. Good, that's what we need.
It's just remarkable and fascinating, your experiences. So you definitely chose to come back to...
I think it's instinctive, because people, I mean, there are some of the cases of past life memories with children. They said, well, I chose these particular friends. But I felt you choose in the same way that you choose who you're going to fall in love with. You don't look around a room and say, I think I'll fall in love with them.
It just happens.
Yeah, it's instinct that you're drawn. Yeah.
So I have to ask the question, maybe there is no answer for it, but why are we here? What is the purpose of it all?
I think that the reason we are here, and the reason for reincarnation, is that's how life works. And life wants to, it wants to exist. Evolution wants life to become more complicated, to think for itself, and to develop. And I think that the energy part of us, the soul part of us, goes hand in hand with that. There's this need to know, to understand, to develop, to be more, to feel more, to find answers. So no different to the reason that we all feel that we're here anyway.
Yes, well, I guess all life, the commonality is that everything grows.
Yes, it does, and it develops.
Evolves.
I was fascinated that life started out obviously as a single cell, but evolution, they've now decided, I followed, there was the epigenetics thing I followed as it was developing. It was attacked by a virus, and a lot of these single cells would have been damaged by the virus, a retrovirus if we're talking, and then eventually the information joins in and you end up with more complex organism. Then the same thing happens again. They've discovered that we're mostly virus, or we may be entirely virus, every time something attacks. So life actually making efforts to become more complicated, attacking to become more complicated, to become more to become sentient, to develop. So
yes, it's a wonderful way to look at it. Many people are so interested obviously in life, but well, they're a part of it, but also exploring their past lives. Many people are fascinated with particular events like battles or boats or certain geographical locations. Why do you think that is? If they're not, I wouldn't use the word obsessed, but completely engrossed.
Yeah, you can. There's I came across somebody some years ago who was telling me her son wrote books about a particular battle and a particular part of the Second World War. He was invited to go and have a look at some of the underground tunnels in one area that he'd written about, because he'd written in such detail. They were in France, they were impressed, and he led people through the tunnels. He admitted to his mother, he wouldn't admit to anybody else, he remembered being there. That's why he was so obsessed in writing about it. That's why he'd spent decades researching the history and finding out more, because he'd remembered being there, but he didn't dare admit that that's what it was. So yeah, I think people do have these fascinations, and it's a personal history that they're actually fascinated by.
Wonderful, wonderful. We've covered so many topics. Is there some? I've asked all the questions. Is there something you'd like to discuss with the Passion Harvest audience that I haven't asked you?
I don't know. I think I've tried very hard to squeeze in all the little bits.
We've squeezed in a lot of information.
I usually have a few ideas that I want to just kind of tuck in there, and I managed to get them in anyway.
Okay, well, Jenny Cockell, thank you so much for being on Passion Harvest. Really, you're such an inspiration, and I'm so honored and grateful that we made the time to connect for the show.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye, Jenny.
Bye, thanks.
If you like this episode, please do subscribe for weekly passionate, inspirational interviews.